Hi everyone, this is Andy from Delay. First of all, big announcement. BoneBreaker actually won a mega grant, and as such, we are finally able to make some updates that we wanted to bring for a while, but had no resources to do at this moment. In this tutorial, we will showcase the new feature for cloth, for NVCloth. And it's nothing amazing, but it really helps bringing stuff into Unreal. For this tutorial, and we're going to be building a clothing piece from zero onto the mannequin. We're going to be using Rich Colburn's ModelingCloth for Blender 2.8. I have slightly modified my version of this add-on to move buttons around because I kept clicking on the wrong one. I will list what has happened. And then Andrew Palmer's VertexColorMaster, because it is a really good tool for isolating vertex channels, which is how we're getting the paint into Unreal for the clothing. With that said, let's get going with some Blender sculpting. Okay, so first of all, I think I already have a mannequin onto my desktop. And I should mention, this is being filmed in 4K out of convenience for me. Because it's really hard to work Blender in a smaller screen. We are going to be modifying the positions of the base skeleton here so that we get a T-pose. This is not necessary, but it is better for modeling, and the important thing is to remember what you do and the rotations that you apply. So I'm applying a 15-degree rotation on the clavicle bones. I'm applying a 35, maybe on the right bone would be best. Let's just do a quick reset just in case I fudged it up. Make sure it says arm up here, and then rotate on Y by 35. Rotate on Y by 35, and then the last piece from top view, I just hit the 7 numpad, is going to be the arm here, and that's going to be about a 15 or a possibly 20, so let's do 20. Now, it's not a perfect T-pose, okay, but it will suffice for what we need to do. So at this point, you can actually go through and delete the empty. We no longer need that. Hide the root, and that's our base model right here. So right now we need to create, I decided to create a tunic, so let's see how that works. If you don't know anything about sewing stuff, it may be a little hard to get it to work. But let's also disable the mannequin and get a base going. So this is going to be one arm, and then we mirror it to the other side. We can just sculpt it in here and just kind of bring it down to where it looks like it's an arm. Kind of like that, and then shrink it on the X. You can enable and use the mannequin for sculpting as a reference. I'm going to scale it down later when it's mirrored. I just want to get the basic shape. So, well, instead of using the loop cut, I'm going to use the shortcut, Control R. So, as I was saying, a sleeve is usually longer on the shoulder, like that. Like this is where it goes into a turn. These two pieces are going to be joined together. This down at the bottom is going to be the seam for the arm, and this can either go inwards or outwards depending on the piece of clothing. We'll just get it to kind of go inwards a little bit so that it's clearer the wrist and that those look a little more like a tunic descending downwards. Possibly the rotation of this is not ideal, but let's add a little more subdivision, and just like that, slide it on X to get more of a kind of rotated or slightly circular view. the whole point of this is that it's treated as a piece of cloth from the start. So the benefit is having a good clean UV that you can UV map, and it's really beneficial when you actually get into the engine, not only for painting it in terms of like the actual colors, but also because of the clean topology for the cloth. Okay, looks about right. Let's do vertical subdivisions that just about match the size. Okay, exit out of that, or actually bring it in, put it on top of the model to where it's right about there. Make sure it's further than the Y. Let's also bring it up to where it should be. Okay. Now obviously it's a very long sleeve. We might need to make it come in from here, and if we want to do that, we just turn this on, make the circle bigger, and so that it's smooth. As long as the vertices match, we'll get a decent result. Now that's not a straight line, of course. You could always just do this, set this to active element, and rotate on Z, just like that. Same thing on the other side, and that should give us a decent, somewhat decent anyway, base. Let's move it to about there so that it can drape down, and obviously let's shrink on the X. Okay, so with that done, I'm going to apply all transforms just in case. They didn't change, you can see that, but it's always a good practice. And then apply a mirror modifier. Great, now we have the base of the sleeves. So for the sleeves to work, we're going to need to get them to bend before we attach a sewing. So we're going to go straight into the Extended Tools ModelingCloth. This is the little change that I made. I moved the collider option from being down here to up on top, just so that I wouldn't click it by mistake. And then I enabled the cloth first, the collider after, and we get the cloth to run. You'll know if it's working by grabbing it, and that's perfect. That's what we want. Now instead of doing that, we'll reset. As long as object collision here is enabled, we'll be fine. Let's enable self collision too, so that the cloth doesn't collide with itself. And let's add a gravity of -1 and activate that. It should drape somewhat alright onto the character. If you see that it's breaking in like that, just increase the collider to whatever you need. Something like that. It's very rough, and it's definitely not, how would you say that? So we can see, you can see right here that I shrunk that a little too much. To modify that, we'll reset this, and yes, do it from the reset, because the active element shifted. Okay. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, this time around it is much better. At this point, we can stop the continuous update and go into the modeling key so that we have this section, and we can apply sew lines to this. And while modeling, if you then increase the sew force to 1, it will bring the sleeves together, just like that. Okay. Right now, that's good enough, but let's go ahead and give it a subdivision. On the edge, just click subdivide. It will be a little more intense. There you go. It also adapts a little easier to the cloth, and that's going to be our sleeves pretty much. We can apply the mesh. You know, one thing that we forgot to do, and we can go back to the modeling source of the ModelingCloth. To do that, we need to just do that and bring this one up, is to go into here and unwrap. This will generate the UV, which is mostly clean. I'm going to rotate it 180 and shrink it down so that it kind of is where it's supposed to be. Because it is a tunic, we're probably going to have the back side over here, the front side over here, and then the other sleeve on the other side. We'll see how that works in a second. So going back to the ModelingCloth, now that this key is really useful actually. Great addition to the plugin. Now the basis has been activated, so the ModelingCloth key doesn't really need to be active, but we'll make it active again just in case we want to reactivate it. So now let's make the body. We'll, like before, add a plane. This time though, we'll rotate it by 90 on the x-axis and bring it up by 1 meter because it was a 2 meter plane. I'm not sure why my objects are coming in as 2 meter, by the way, but I've gotten so used to it that it may not be the case for you. 3D cursor scale on X. Okay, so let's say that that's about correct, more or less. We'll bring this two in so that they are more or less where the shoulders are. Remember, you need extra tissue anyway, and we'll need to sculpt those to be circular at the top over there. We can move this up so that it doesn't give us issues later on to about there, and let's Control R, subdivide, and bring the top down so that we have a circular thing going. So this will be brought in at the waist by a belt, but we're not going to mess with the actual textile. I guess it's not really textile, but you get the point. We want the cloth to be cloth, and then we simulate a belt or something around it if we want to. Let's see how many loops that was. That was 7 loops. And that was 8, so take 1 out. Okay, it's important to try and keep things even as much as possible. Let's add a... hang on a second. Let's disable that. Slide this up to about here, and then let's work on the cut. So I will disable the mannequin, disable the sleeves. 3 points, just like that, should be fine enough. I'm going to select those two, and with this active, and maybe a let's see what happens with that. Let's try the other one. Okay, let's say that that's good enough. It might not be down far enough. It probably needs to be a little lower actually. So let's undo that, and let's keep undoing until we find the there. Bring this down more. Say to about the breast line. It's also important to try and keep the same amount of loops as half of the arm. So let's go and check how many loops those are in the end. So we have 1, 2, well, a good tip for that, by the way, is to enable the wireframe view on top. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So we have 8 loops that we need to have on this section. So we'll click this once, and then on here we'll just type 8, and well, that's actually going to be 6, isn't it? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, one more 7, 8. So that should more or less match up exactly to the tunic. Now that that's the case, we can grab those 2 points and bring them in like before on X. Okay. Now with that done, we need to prep the rest of the textile, and also maybe make this circular. If you have loop tools installed, that's actually kind of helpful to go into the loop tool menu and click something like circle, and instead of regular, it will make that happen. Just need to bring it back up to where it should be, more or less. And if I want those to conform, I'm just going to slide them down, bring them to down here, and then go back up. Be sure that this option is turned off. That option will out-emerge the vertices. We do not really want that in this case. Let's bring this up to about here as well. Well, it needs to be more circular. So I can do this and then disable that and just bring it back up like this, and then shrink on the X. Now that may be a little too much, so I can modify the curvature of it by activating the option here, and let's do active bounding box center so that we see visually where that's at. Let's say that up there is probably going to be good enough like that. At about the same distance. The more perfect it is, the better, but also I was actually accidentally sliding instead of moving it up. Okay, so let's say that that's it, and let's add subdivisions to kind of match it. That's that. Now we want to fix those. We'll bring them down here, and then disable that. GG slide back up. Same thing here. It will ease the circles somewhat. Okay, let's bring up the mannequin again and do a little neck cut. So the cloth ended up being a little above the neck, which is fine because we need the we need to basically cut up to here. So we'll select these 3 vertices, delete them. That gives us a base. We can get rid of those 2, kind of have it, and then delete that one as well, which means delete this one too. Okay, that's about mostly correct. We could go further, but we'll need to add more tessellation to this anyway. I don't mean tessellation, I actually mean actual loops. But I'm just selecting the faces, clicking F to fill them up so that they're full. Okay, that's our front piece of the tunic. We're going to select it all. go into top view on solid, bring it down to where it's in front of the character, Shift D to duplicate, Y and bring it to the back about the same distance, and then Shift N to flip the normals. Flipping the normals, something you should be aware of, but let's make it visible, and that's where the normals are, and that's where the normals are. So we have front and back. Now for the back section, I don't like the edges, so I will go into edge mode by clicking 3, delete the edges, bring the vertex in, or bring the vertex up by extruding it. We can get rid of both loops in this case for the neck, and then go back into here, delete that, extrude those two at the same time, and for convenience we can do this as active cursor over here, and then just do 1, 2, 3, and 4, scale to the Z, and 1 and 2 and scale to the Z. Alright, so that's our squares. We need to fill them back up. Select the 4 and click the button. Select the 4 and click the button. I'm not too worried about the X being incorrect. On this one, you can probably just grid fill. I'm afraid that's going to create a single face, so I'll just do it manually. 3 and 4. Let's do a cleanup. Mesh, cleanup, delete loose. Should be 0 down at the bottom. And then again, mesh, cleanup, merge by distance, just in case there is anything that needs merging. We can bring that down to 0.05, 0.005. That will help. There shouldn't be anything on this mesh that is at a bad distance. Okay, so with that done, we have this, we have that. We can now start sewing it together. But before we do that, let me disable the wireframe view just for purpose, and let's add sew lines. So when you do the sew lines, you want to make sure that everything is straight and that they match up, which is why we duplicated a piece of cloth from the front to the back. We'll go here and click on sew lines. You'll see a nice line come in. Do the same on the opposite side. Sew lines. Okay, and we'll let it fall, I think, right now before we go and attach the seam to the other side. So when you enable ModelingCloth like this, it may or may not work. It seems like it has, which is great. So let's activate the sew force. It'll bring it up, and there we go. Okay, now disable the continuous update. Go into the ModelingCloth key so that we actually see what is happening, and we can do this and apply the sew line, but we need to remember where the edge was, so we can go into the basis, and our edge was somewhere around here, right? We have 8 loops, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, so that's the edge. For ease of use, I'm going to mark the edge as a mark it as a seam. We'll remove the seam later because we need to still make this into a we need to still activate the UV for it, so we want to make sure we do that as well. So we'll go back to here, select this side, select that side, unclick all of those, and create the sew lines. So when they're crooked like that, you know that something went wrong. They should not be offset. They should be straight lines. So one side of the cloth somehow is more than the other. I'm not sure how that is possible. It seems that was the case. So I must have marked that one in the wrong spot. Easily resolved so that we can see it on the other side. Okay. 1 and 2, and then deselect the dots. Create the sew lines. Alright, with that done, we can click continuous update again, and that will tighten up the tunic. Okay, now before we activate gravity and let it fall and simulate, we want to sew the arms on so that they're working. To do that, we'll start by before we apply the mesh, actually, let's break it down, go to basis and unwrap. Let's clear that seam line. This will create the two pieces of cloth, and which one's the front and which one's the back, we'll figure that out in a minute. Let's go into the arms, and because those are duplicated and still not merged, we'll do that and mark a seam on this. We'll also mark a seam on the inside, and then well, it's really a good question as to why that hasn't sew forces to 1, so they should have joined. It might be that the collision is too far, and by collision I mean the mannequin's collision. So simulate again and go into the mannequin and reduce this to like 2.5, just very slightly, little by little, until you see that the mesh is coming together. If it doesn't still come together when you get to an unreasonable size, then there must be something wrong with the sew line over here. I guess we could always do that manually. Okay, well, let's do it. So if I click on this and click on that, you can see it selects the two edges. First of all, let's mark the seam on both, and then let's do a mesh cleanup merge by distance, and let's increase that to 1 or 0.1, 0.01 is what I'm looking for. Okay, that kind of took care of a lot of them. So just select the two, merge at center, select the two, merge at center, and the last one, select the two, merge at center. Now, some of them might still not be merged. That's okay. Just select the whole mesh, mesh cleanup, merge by distance, change it back to 0.005, and takes care of that. It is also mirrored to the other side, so that's perfect. At this point, we will want to first of all check that this and the bases are the same, and then just remove the keys. Whoops. You leave the bases on, I guess, because you need to disable ModelingCloth. Okay, and then you can delete the bases or not. Oh, we need to remove the bases though, so there. Okay, must have been a Blender glitch because we need to apply the modifier. To apply the modifier, you can't have the situation there. Once the modifier is applied, now I have this one that was ModelingCloth, and I can just merge the two with a Control J. This will give me that effect, and I can actually grab the arm, go into top view, and with the help of the other clock key, we can move the arm to a decent distance on the loops so that it's easier to sew them together. You will probably have to note, because we didn't do this when it was mirrored, the distance and then duplicate it to the other side. So it's on the X and it's negative 0.05 more or less. We'll do the same on the other one, and it's going to be GX 0.05 because it's not on the negative side. Alright, so now between this and this we should be able to just create a sewing line. Let's try that again. Before we do that, we might want to actually merge and mark the seam here, mark the seam here. Same thing on the other side. I'm holding Shift and Control so that I have it all selected. Mark the seam, and then mesh cleanup, merge by distance. 0.005 should work just fine in this case. I don't see any obvious separations like before. Remember, this one had no gravity enabled, so it won't pull through the model anymore. So let's try the seam line between this and that, and when we do that, if it actually works, which it did not, complaining about something about the edge loops not being edge loops. So let's do it one by one, right? We have this one to this one, and this one to this one. So for whatever reason it doesn't like this one, we can skip it and go to the one next. And it is perfectly normal to have to do those manually on both sides at times. Though I am definitely not sure why that would be not an edge loop, but if we just use the edges options, it will not throw the error, so let's do that. We did not clear or check where the seam around the neck was, but it did end up in the right spot, so that's important. Let's mark it just so we have it marked. And because I can't understand what's going on anymore, we are going to activate the continuous update, which will kind of bring things in. It appears that something went very wrong there. So recovering from that, because we united the mesh, but I forgot to activate it, I suppose. Deselect all, go in here, select in edge mode, select the edges. This will select all the edges, including the ones that we have on top. Just delete the edges. Some are being shifted, and that's the issue. Okay, so the history actually worked. Let's go into here, and before we do anything, apply to mesh so that this is the base, and that now when we actually simulate stuff, it will start from this position. It is common to break the plugin. Don't worry, it's just a matter of removing the information from it, including maybe the cloth pins, and there's nothing to worry about on that one. Activate the plugin again, activate the collider again. Remember to set your outer margin back to what it was, which was 3 if it went away, and then on continuous update you'll see this starting to work. Now I still want to get all the seams going, I think I may have hooked that one up already, possibly. It might be the back one showing through, so let's exit out of here, go into continuous update, pause it, go into edit mode, and then go into the clock key and continue to apply the sew lines around the area. Ha! It seems that we screwed up one of the loops. So first let's see how that looks. And you can see that there is an issue somewhere in here where one ends up being in two over there. So I can quickly fix this by going into edit mode, hey, and then delete loose from mesh cleanup, delete loose. That will remove all the edges that are actually creating the sew lines, and it should do this for us. We'll have to reapply those, so maybe let's go back to where those were applied, and let's do with this tool, which you access by just pressing C, select all the edges that we need to merge, and then mesh cleanup, merge by distance, remove stem vertices. That's probably about right. What else? Before we activate this, yeah, let's do a mesh clean loose. Okay, let's do that before we even activate the ModelingCloth key. It might just help. Mesh, clean up, merge by distance, remove stem vertices, which is again seemingly about right. Enable the ModelingCloth, enable the collider, simulate, and the arms snap together. Good. Now stop that. Go into the ModelingCloth key and let's check this out. So this thing is turning into a tris, which means that there is a missing loop from the sleeve onto the front of the clothing. So to fix it, again, edge, delete loose, mesh cleanup rather, mesh cleanup, delete loose. And if we go into continuous update, it will release the arm. Okay, then we stop and let's have a look. So we have the top to the top. Let's create a sew line. We have D top to D top, and let's create a sew line. And continuous update. They will snap together. I can now grab the sleeve, pull it, stop the continuous update, and go back and look at the topology. Or keep going down until we see where it becomes evident that we need an extra loop. Just try and keep it even on both sides, and it is a painstakingly long process, but without this add-on it would be even longer, so let's not complain. That's Sue lines. I think this is where it becomes obvious that there is an edge loop missing from either the arm or one extra on the back. And here we go. So we have a little bit of a hole. We can actually just fill that hole, but it will change our topology. So we have 1, 2, 3, and we have 1 that goes here. So we need to add 2 loops. We can just add 1 loop here and 1 loop here, and then 1 to here, Sue line, 1 to here, Sue line, 1 to here, Sue line, and 1 to here, Sue line. Enabling this will snap the mesh near perfect. We need to repeat that on the other side, same thing at the bottom, and then start connecting the dots. Maybe because we fixed that, it is possible that if we do this and click Sue lines, everything will be matched up exactly. Maybe. We'll test. Just enable continuous update. See if we get a good snap. Seems like we did. Alright. So that's the cloth. It has been put together. We have our little tunic, ridiculous as it may be. Let's go into face view to select those loops, right? Select those loops on here again. Merge by distance. 36 vertices. Alright, that should be about the loop of the arms. Now let's work on the UV for a minute. We have the UV that we broke out, right? So we have one side that's the front, one side that's the back. We don't really know which one's which. So if I do that, it will highlight the front. I will rotate this by -90, I suppose, or +90. We'll place this at about the center and shrink it down. We'll bring it back up. We're doing those separate so that we can actually put everything inside of the UV, and then we'll scale it by proportion so that they match up with the sleeve, because this sleeve is the one that had the better so we want to actually move this one. For this one we want to flip on the X, so scale along the X to -1 and bring it all the way to the other side. Okay, and now that we have this, we have our cloth. We select all the UVs, we'll see what they are. Now under the UV there is an option to I don't remember what it is called, but it's supposed to average island scale. There you go. This makes them all about the same textile size. Bring this one up, bring this one down. In fact, let's do this. Let's try this. Scale it up till we get something that is closer together. We probably do want to, because the way it works, it might be better to just join those so that the seams match exactly, since they match exactly in the actual model. And then you have the arm, bring it in. Now if we We can actually cheat this by removing the seam here. And after pinning, you just re-unwrap. Also, the arm does definitely not need a seam on the top. We would only really need the seam over there. So, okay, with that done, let's see what we pin. We pin everything except for this area. Just hit P to pin it, and then unwrap. And that will merge the points where they're supposed to be according to where they are in the character, which doesn't look all too pretty compared to the flat out, but it does its job. Except for maybe that one pin over there. So let's pin those two. It's only the middle line now that's getting affected. And I guess apparently this one was pinned, so Alt P to undo the pin. And maybe I didn't undo it enough, because yeah, let's try and keep the neck straight, right? We'll manually align the neck, so we can pin this and then select the two dots here and either scale on X with a value of 0 after making sure that they are the only thing selected, and scale on Y with a value of 0. Same thing, other side, scale Y value of 0, scale X value of 0, and at this point we Alt P on there to undo that pin, and you can probably just select all and unwrap, and that gives us a little cleaner of a UV seam. Now let's try and put the sleeves in. This can go really bad, or it can actually work for the best, so it's kind of give or take. But to do it, we'll need to select the seams here, and if we are in linked mode, that will actually select the seams onto the model like that. Remove seam so that we can unwrap that piece, and we want this one pinned, but you can see what's happening now. So we'll click the unlink again and then select all, and then there you go. Now only the seams are selected somehow. It just happened on its own, and I'm happy for it, so I'm not gonna complain about it. So we're bringing those closer in. The least amount of stretching we get, the best it will be. So I will try to align to that. It doesn't have to be exact. In fact, it will probably never be. But I like my UVs clean. So from here we can probably unwrap, and it will join where it should, which is what I was looking for. Now you can't unfortunately slide those on G like before. The UV here will be slightly stretched. What you can do after pinning the whole thing, because that seam will be changed, is actually unpin a portion, something like this, and just hope that when you unwrap it, it doesn't completely mess it up. So it looks decent, and it takes the shape of the shoulder. So it looks better than I hoped it did. So I will go ahead and select the whole thing here. Try and keep the same amount of loops. Alt P, unwrap. Okay, we got our base mesh. Let's not forget to remake the seams. Yeah, they are important for selecting the cloth at various places, including the top one in case we want to animate. So we'll again mark it over here. Now in top view, I can actually unclick like that. I might have to reselect that edge ring, I don't know. No, looks like we lucked out. Mark the seam on it. That's our seam. So when you go into face mode, you can now just select the parts. 1, 2, 3, 4. They actually matched with the UV, so that's perfect for us. Again, let's look at the UV. Make sure it's clear. It's good. Maybe let's bring it down a little so that it's further down into the center. Alright, we got our UV done. Going back to the modeling cloth, let's disable the collider. Let's see here, did we apply it? We did not apply it. Okay, so if you did not apply it, you're going to want to just remove the clock keys in reverse, and that will actually get the information applied. And then apply the modeling cloth again, apply the collider again, and activate the continuous update. The force won't matter anymore, but keep it on just in case we missed one of the links or if we forgot to remove it. I'm just going to enable gravity so that the cloth kind of descends a little more naturally onto the character. You can see the issue with the neck there, but it is also due to the fact that we have a gigantic outer margin to keep the cloth from colliding with the arms. So we can try to reduce that a little. Let's go with 2 and see what happens. When you're dealing with cloth in reality, the further it is from the base, the less protrusion you get. So kind of happy with that. We'll fix that manually right now. We'll stop the continuous update. Let's give this mesh another subdivision. Yeah, you could apply a modifier, but I'd rather just do, and on the basis, make sure you click the basis when you do the subdivide. Okay. This will take a lot of computational power for the plugin, so the simulation will now be really slow and perhaps problematic at points to where you can't maybe grab things as nicely as you would before. Also, we have self collision off. Make sure you enable that. And because I had it off and I screwed up, I'm going to reset the simulation and just let it simulate again, because it is a little easier than having to deal with it. You can help slide pieces that won't go along just like that with the grab tool. Really helpful. And the fact that they don't slide is actually due to the mesh topology. There must be like a line onto the mannequin that's causing that issue. Just like there's probably a line under there where there is a gap that it's trying to fall into, because there is one on the mannequin. The parts are separate, they're not all in one. Alright, so for our purposes, this will be it. We'll call that it, and we'll apply this to the mesh. Now the mesh, if you might have noticed, is not even shaded smooth, so we'll do that. Flash, shade smooth. That'll resolve some issues. Here you see that there is a little issue with self collision happening. We can actually re-enable the continuous update, and because it's faster to deal with it and it makes it look better than by just sculpting onto the mesh. We'll drag it out just like that to where that it clears out, and increase the self margin for that. I'm hoping that will resolve itself. If not, we can always bump this up to 3 again. That seemed to work a little better for it. Or no, don't go with 21. Make sure not to screw it up too badly. Let's stop the simulation. Let's do something on the mannequin, right? So we're having an issue with the collision. Let's fix the collision. We have the arm here, right? Let's just add a mesh cylinder. Vertices doesn't really matter, but let's say 9 times 2. And a radius of about 0.25 with a depth of about 0.5. We'll have to scale it. Obviously it's not correct. I was thinking I was not thinking radius, I was thinking diameter. Common occurrence, it seems. I'll rescale the Z or the X-axis separately to get it to be longer later on. But the whole point is to fix that gap in there. So doing this and scaling on X will help with that. Now we'll select the inner edge, bring it down to about where the arm is. Do the same on the other side. Okay, the idea is to cover that area right there, so that should work, especially when we give it a margin. Now we'll apply an mirror modifier to get the other side of it. After, so click on it and Control A all transforms. That'll put it on the other side. Click apply. It will be part of the same object, which is perfect because we need to activate it as a collider. Let's give it the same outer margin as the mesh. Go back into the plane here and continuous update. And yes, that actually did break. So when that happens, again, we remove the colliders, we remove the modeling cloth, and we choose whether we want to stick to this one or we want to go back to this one. So I really want to go back to that one. I will delete them this way around. Okay, and then enable ModelingCloth first. It'll take a little time, and then enable the collider and the collider for the cylinder. And now continuous update. And you can see that arm popping right back out. So let's help it along by moving the geometry out if we can. Okay, let's just say that that's as good as we're going to get in this quick tutorial because it's not quick anymore otherwise. And we'll fix it with sculpting. So we'll apply the mesh, we'll remove modeling cloth, we'll remove the keys and the pin, we'll remove the colliders, dispose of the cylinder, go into sculpt mode, and apply a smooth modifier onto the areas that are affected. The bigger the radius, the better. And this does mess up your UVs somewhat, or I mean it has potential to. So the way that we lock them in with pins should prevent most distortion from happening. But it's still just a should. It won't necessarily. Alright. This area here is a mess, and maybe we do not want to have the X mirror on it. Now the nice thing is that the cloth within the engine will fix most of those issues by making them almost impossible to notice. Also, I should mention, usually tunics have a belt that comes with it to keep it from draping down like this. But as I said, we're running out of time here, so, and we'll still have to weight paint this too. Okay, that's our tunic done and ready. Go back into object mode. Now that we have that, we select the mesh from the mannequin, select the mesh from the tunic, we go into weight paint. From weight paint, we transfer weights, and we'll go by name so that all of them pop up. Okay, and that will actually have all of them packed in here, whether they apply or not. Like the hand should probably not apply, delete it. Keep going down the line, like index, those really do not need to be there. The lower arm does. The lower arm twist does. And we don't know where the paint there is ending up, which is another issue in itself. But we'll get to it in a minute. Just removing the groups one at a time while reading what they are so that I don't mistakenly delete something I actually need. You can see that the neck didn't really transfer it right. It's not mirrored to the other side. That could cause an issue. So let's say that that color is about a 0.5 on the scale, and let's go into neck. 0.5. Let's mask it out. Let's mask it out so that we do not mistakenly affect other areas of the mesh that we do not want to affect. Should have probably used face selection for that, but either way. So with that done, just click the little face, apply the somewhat liberally because we masked it as the neck area. You should have auto normalize on when you do this. The option is down here, and it was actually off for whatever reason, so I'll pass it in again. Okay, so that was that, and unclick that to get to that, and then head should not even be in here, so we'll delete it. Tie left, calf right, calf twist, and then foot should not be in here at all, or the ball. So ball and foot should not be within your cloth. Foot right, ball right. And that seems to be more or less the clean section. Now we need to address that. So in a piece of cloth, usually the backing of the cloth moves along with the pelvis, because it is going to be painted. Oh, I did not enable that. Because it is painted onto the cloth, it will kind of move around based on where the pelvis is. So it's usually enough to do this. Alright. And then obviously that removed it from the other sections. Now we need to fix, like I mentioned, the arms, because we don't know where the weight paint for the front of the arm ended up. And we can indeed apply it to the lower arm twist. So I have a value of 1 selected, and I'm going to, because otherwise it will, when I activate the paint here, it will try and auto normalize to the other side, which is missing the weight paint as well. So I'll just do it with a isolated mask, and as long as the value goes all to 1 in the sections that we deleted, it will not cause any problems with the outer normalize or any other issue. So make sure that you get all of it right from the start. This is probably one of the most painful things to do as terms of modeling goes. Getting the weight paint right is one of the hardest things, and doing it on the fly like this is even more painful. Let's find the other arm and do the same thing. Okay. So then, let's say that that's done. It'll probably look horrible still when we bring it down, but let's get going and do actually bring it down so that we can bring it into the engine. Okay, so before we do that, let's do a weight smooth operation. Let's have iterations of about 5. Let us have a factor of about 10 or 1, sorry. And no, we want it on the whole thing, so we'll make sure that that's disabled. And yes, you can expand or contract however you see fit. I would just leave it at 0.5, which is the default. And if the mask is giving you issues, just A to select all. So we'll undo that, edit, redo, because that, and then weight, smooth. The settings are preset to what I had, and instead of subset active group, all groups. That's the one I was looking for, really. So this will create a shift and a nice even paint across the whole mesh, pretty much normalized for us to bring into the engine. The pelvis here may have exceeded its positioning a little, so we can reverse the process on this one. Weight, smooth, and we can use the contract to about, oops. Let's see if that actually takes. It didn't take because the group is not active. Okay, let's undo that then. So yeah, I want to do that, but to do that, let's exit out of here, bring up the root. That's our bones. Let's select the bones, shift click to select the armor, go into weight paint again, and this time around we should be able to, outside of the mode there, actually shift click onto the pelvis, or control click as it may be. It's not really cooperating, and I can't really tell you why that is, other than the fact that maybe the armor itself is not selected. Trying to find a bone. Alright, little cheat. If we go into object mode, select the armature, go into edit mode. Hey, I selected the armature, didn't I? Select the pelvis like that. You can now even go into pose mode and it will pre-select it for you. So select the armor, select the tunic, weight paint, and trying to get to that bone. Okay, that's the bone. We'll do it without seeing. So we have the root selected. We'll select the plane. Control select the plane so that it's active and the root is not. And then with the plane selected, we can go back to weight paint, where we can just right click on the pelvis, hopefully. There you go. Sampling the pelvis. And then when we smooth, we will now be able to select the pelvis and contract it however much we think is necessary. Something like that is probably good enough. Normalize all just to apply, and quick brush through on the legs. Okay, it is now time to access the other plugin and the addition to BoneBreaker in order to export this rig or this cloth. Well, actually, before we do that, we do really need to bring this back in from here to a T-pose. So right now it doesn't have an armor modifier, which means it will stay in the position it's at currently, and it was painted at the position it's at currently. So let's try giving it an armor modifier, and you'll see that technically I think the arms will shift upwards. Yeah. Alright, victory. So obviously we do not want that to happen, right? So we'll leave the armor modifier empty for now. If you remember at the beginning, I told you that we need to keep the rotations in mind as to what they are and what they're going to be. So now that we do, we actually want to duplicate this and have a second skeleton in here for a minute. We will use this as a guide. So we'll access the skeleton, the new one that we just copied. We'll go into pose mode, select all the bones and clear them. Alt G, Alt R, Alt S, just to make sure that there is no scale or anything else in it. We can get out of pose mode over here, and we can start undoing the changes onto here after or before, after setting the pose as the master pose. Okay, so we'll select the other one, go into pose mode, we'll go pose, apply, pose as rest pose. Yes, the character snaps down and the cloth stays up because it is not linked to the armature. That's perfectly fine. Remember how the arms shifted up a second ago? If I now select root, the armature is applied and the arms are extended up. At this point, we go back into pose mode and start undoing the changes. This one was 20. This one was, make sure it's the upper arm L, 30, I think, on Y. If it's wrong, you'll find out in a minute because it will not match up with the underlying structure, which is why we copied that over. This one was 15. As you can see, I messed up one of the rotations and the bones don't line up perfectly, and it has to be the upper arm. So we'll rotate that by 25, by 5 more. But before you do that, you probably need to unrotate the clavicles. And then rotate the clavicle again. You see that the position is falling more or less where it should be, but we can't have more or less, it needs to be accurate. So it seems like this one didn't rotate appropriately. It might have been 35. Would have helped if I had written them down. So we undo all. And then rotate X 25, rotate X 25, rotate Y 35, rotate Y 35, rotate Y 15, rotate Y 15 in the negative, and so one arm matches up exact. You can see the two bones are now perfect. One other one does not. You can try to rotate on Z by 15 by 5, but because the section here is been altered, it won't be the same rotation. So since the other arm works, I will just undo this one, rotate 15. Can't believe that I had different measures, but it happens. Here we go. They snap back into place exactly where they should be. And yes, the mannequin looks like he's broken, but that's because he's linked to this armature. Now that we have that done, we need to first exit pose mode, apply the modifier to the armor so that this is the new rest pose for the tunic. Go into this one, go into pose mode, and apply as a rest pose. That brings the mannequin back up, and it also brings the armature here in sync with the rest. So now we can actually just parent this one manually by shift clicking, going into it, and apply an armor modifier with root. We can just delete root 1 because we don't need it anymore. Rename this object to tunic, and probably SKM tunic. Alright, and let's test the weight paint real quick. You can see it moves. You can see it moves. Was that the shoulder twist? It was. Let's grab the arm. Okay, so it moves with the arm, and it's more or less okay. This area right here, yeah, that needs to be weight painted to the armature. That's kind of like, it had to be done at the beginning. So what we can do now is just smoothen it out with a sculpt. And edit, undo history. Let's go back to before I did that and activate the X modifier so that this is happening on both sides of the mesh at the same time for the same amount without me having to look into it. Because of the way we move the arms, we have some self-collision happening here. Many ways to fix that. Probably disabling the mannequin, going into the cloth, and smoothing that out in sculpt mode, being one of the best. This should be happening on the other side as well. Should being the operative term, of course. If we also smooth this side, we'll have some pretty clean topo to play around in the engine with. Alright, let's just call that a day on that. It's not the best. The neck area could use extra work. The whole mesh is pretty far from the mannequin, so that could be an obvious improvement to really bring this in. So maybe let's do it like this. Select the loop with the edge modifier on and decent size. Let's try to bring it in. Maybe we want to also select something like the center there, and let's do this. select here, deselect. We are in wireframe mode, so let's select that vertex over there if we can. What you can do is just go into face mode, select the pieces. I just know where stuff is on the mannequin, so it's easier for me. If you've never done this before, you might have a hard time figuring it out, but eventually you do. And there, that's the vertex I wanted, and all I wanted to do was to set the cursor to selected, so that's where my focal point for the shift will be when I set the cursor over here, and select the edge loop there and just scale around. Nice and easy, and not too much probably, because if we end up, we're not going to end up putting cloth on here, but alright. Nice clean topology. If you want to add a belt at this point, you would probably go back and model this again. In fact, activating cloth on it would also fix the coming out. I just don't want to waste more time on it. Okay, so that's done. That's done. It's time to look into painting the cloth. So first of all, let's add a material, because when we import into the engine, we'll need one. I do not work materials in Blender like ever. I always work them in engine, usually by hand. So that's just me. If you want to import your own materials, you probably can. I just don't like doing it. Go ahead and disable the bones because we don't need to see them yet. And here, so we're going to be talking about our new addition to the BoneBreaker. And the first thing we're going to do is remove color. That will activate vertex paint and put us into a zero values. Then we will choose a distance. So cloth, yeah, it can move at about 100 centimeters. This is a distance in centimeters. But a more realistic value of what the engine can handle is probably around 30. So we'll set that as our preview, and that's the value that we're going to use as a multiplier when we go into the engine and import the channel as the cloth. So what we're doing is importing vector paint, vertex paint, as channels. So if you enable the view right now, we'll just process the mesh and it won't do anything because there is no paint. But if we add some paint and then you right click, it will show you which way the normals point and what is happening to the cloth. So from this, I know that the normals are not correct right from the get-go. I can actually just disable the view, go back into the object mode, apply all transforms to it, and maybe even select and recalculate normal with a Shift N, which should take care of most of the issues. We'll remove the color again, enable the view, paint, right click, and that's where my vertices are. So we'll remove color one last time, and you do have to right click to get the plugin to actually display, because there's a lot of draw calls on cloth, and if it was rendering every frame, it would take a load off your computer that you have no idea. So we'll go into VCM. Now VCM is our VertexColorMaster, and it's a really great plugin for what we're doing because it lets us see one channel at a time. So we can select R and isolate the channel, and now we have the ability to paint where we want our mesh to deform the most. For that, it also offers a linear gradient. So let's start with that and let's see how that goes. So we have a linear gradient going from here to here, apply it, and this is how much the cloth will move around. Now, if the cloth moves around this much on the front, you already know that you're getting a bunch of issues when the legs move and kick the cloth around. So I would say that this value needs to be down to like maybe a 0.3, something like that. it is going to have to be something you do, so you decide, but the visualizer is kind of like mimicking what the original oh yes, every time that you exit or enter edit mode, you do need to reactivate the view mode again, so keep that in mind. Now that we have that locked in though, we can actually just apply the color here, just like that. And then apply it. And there should be in VCM a smooth option of some sort, or you can just use the blur tool to blur it out and get the values to ease between one and the other until you get something that is nice. Okay, so we have a bunch of swinging on the back, not much swinging on the front, and we have a little swinging if you see over here, but we need more than that. 0.30, let's say 0.5 on the beginning of that. We'll access this mode, select the arms to isolate them, and re-enable the view. Go back into VCM, and we'll use a circular gradient that goes from 0 to 0.5, so something like this much. Visualize it. You'll see that there is some movement. So this is our max distance. We could also, if we wanted to, paint some backstop and some other values, which might help with blocking the how the cloth collides into the engine. But let's just do this. You know, I'll leave the backstop and the max distance to you if you're making your own cloth. This is just meant to be a general look through at this new very nice visualizer that helps with transferring to the engine. So let's see how it works. We have the, don't forget that after you're inside a color range, you need to apply the changes, and then when you get out of it, if you right click, you'll actually see how the plugin manages the colors, which makes it a little easier to visualize even if you have different layers. Okay, our piece of clothing is pretty much ready to go. So we need to make sure that it has the armature deformed first of all, because if it doesn't, it will create issues. Make sure if it has the material, because it might error out in the engine when you don't have one. And then we select the root. Actually, before we do that, we don't have any sharps or anything on here, and we did shade it to smooth, so the smoothing group is perfectly fine as it is. We can click on faces to export the two items selected, so make sure that the mannequin is not selected. Click on selected objects, which will do that, and then we'll save it on the desktop as SKM tunic and launch up Unreal. Right, and we have the character. You can bring up its blueprint like this. I'll bring up the blueprint, and I know you can't read things because it's not in 4K, because it is in 4K. So when it gets rendered down to 1080, you won't be able to see what things are, but that should be fine because there isn't much that we need to do. We literally just grab the mesh from the desktop, wherever it may have ended up, and being as I have multiple screens, it's obviously not on this screen, but here it is. So we have the tunic. Just drop it into the engine and it will create the import. If everything went right, you'll have the skeleton. You just select the UI mannequin skeleton and make sure to select the physics asset for the SK mannequin as well. That's important for cloth if we don't want to create our own asset, and I definitely do not want to right now. So we'll have that. So that's our piece of cloth. Now before I make it big again and explain everything again, I'm just going to move it into here and also remove that one, because right there, and then I'll make it big and kind of explain. So just need to clear things here, rotation, and that will be, so it is skinned to the character, but it is not moving with the character. We go onto the construction script, we drag the mesh, we drag the tunic, we'll do a master, and it comes up with master pose component. Let me zoom that in so you can actually read it. Okay, that's that. You just connect this and you make the mesh the master pose component. When you compile this, you'll get the tunic moving into the viewport. Alright, let's give that tunic a material. I have this prepped. I'll open the material so you can kind of read it. Very complex material, isn't it? Alright, so this material has an instance. The instance is onto the cloth, and I can just apply it like that. Okay, I'll save that, and then we'll go around in the game so that you see the tunic moving, animating, and mostly working, but it has no cloth. You can see the legs not basically passing through, and you can see how it works, etc. Okay, now open this one up again, and we apply the weight paint. Now this section, so what you do is you select this. No idea why it looks this way. So with the selection on, you right click on the piece of cloth, you create a piece of clothing, you make sure that the physics asset is set. This will create and have the clothing data pop up in here. If it does not, you just click on import Apex file, close that out, and it will recalculate. After that, right click again and apply, and you'll have the cloth applied to this. Now in your project, you're going to want to enable the skin options and recompute tangent so that the cloth looks nice when you actually paint the cloth. For me right now, I'm not going to care about that. We're just going to go into paint mode, and if you've never seen this before, it's really bad. It's the worst thing about the whole engine right now. And yes, you could technically just paint stuff like this, but good luck getting into like the arm where the meshes are colliding and having issues. So for that, we have this option here to copy from vertex color. Our vertex color was red. The value we tested was 30 visually. So if I import that, it will generate the weight paint that I was looking for. After that, just applying it by clicking on the apply will get the cloth to be in the engine and ready to go. If I now click on play, you'll have cloth deforming and looking a whole lot better than it did before, especially on the legs where it was dragging along. Now the cloth has properties that you can set, and yeah, the weight paint could have probably gone up a little more so that the butt was a little more loose. So you can always modify that. If you do have to re-import, maybe we should go through that. Let's do that. So I'll remove the clothing data. I will delete the clothing data, right? So we have now a piece of cloth that has no cloth. We'll come back to here, and we'll go back into vertex paint mode. What you can do is just click enable view. It will toss you into vertex paint mode. We'll go into BCM and isolate this channel again. And so the value kind of ends up here, maybe a little too abruptly. It is a nice scale, but let's say I want the scale to go up like all the way to over here. And for practice sake, let's kind of do it manually. So we have a value of 0.5 that we can paint. Question is, are we painting it? We are apparently not. Or maybe we are, I just can't really see it. Oh, we're using blur. Never mind. There, now it's clearly painting. Okay. So we're taking this up to 0.5, over up to here, and then we'll go down to 0.25 like most of the NVCloth tutorial tell you to do. And then let's even add a 0.5, what is it, 0.05, that's what let's do 0.1. Okay, so that's our 0.1 over here, and remember we're touching on vertex, so then we do a blur manually. Let's preview that. Okay, a little more blur over here so that it's a little more even. And with that done, so that's our new cloth paint. We'll apply that. You'll see this change over here, and we can go straight into object mode. Remember to select the skeleton again, click on faces, and export back to the desktop. Same files, same selected objects, otherwise you're going to get the mesh imported in there, which will cause issues. So we come back into the engine. Where are you? At this point you just click re-import. Now when you re-import, you'll actually be able to see that the vertex color are now changed to the new ones, and there you have it. It goes all the way to the back. Okay, well, it went away on its own. I wanted to disable that. So we have no cloth data right now because we deleted it, and that's actually an important thing to do because it does not take the new vertex paint or any changes, I find. As you can see, that did not show up this time, so I will click on import, close it out, and then it'll be available. And then don't forget that you also need to apply it to the clothing, just like we did before. And yet again, so our max distance here, well, let's go into paint mode so that we can actually see it happen. Copy it from vertex color red with a value of 30, which is our scaling factor, and apply that by unclicking the paint. That should do it. We'll save this out. May not be perfect, but that's how you do it. And now we have a full-on tunic moving along with our character. And considering that the normal skinning is not even on, even though it's only white, it looks fairly good. Alright, thanks for watching this tutorial. With the Mega Grant, we are going to be further developing the tool to do other things that we wanted to do for a while, including skinning your own character. That's coming soon. So stay tuned.